This week on Entrepreneurs, we explore the trends that are changing education and we meet the founders whose vision and practices will have a global ripple effect on learning. I'm Jack Delosa, and Entrepreneurs starts now.
This is Entrepreneurs.
Welcome to Entrepreneurs, where we talk directly to the founders of Australian businesses, from small business owners to startups and the icons of industry. Tonight, we speak to the entrepreneurs who are challenging the way kids, students and adults learn. First up, we're talking with David Chiem, the Australian expat behind the globally successful early learning institute MindChamps. David's story is quite remarkable. He arrived in Australia with his family as a Vietnamese refugee at the age of 9. He didn't speak a word of English and had very little access to any resource at all. He has gone on to do many significant things in business, media and the arts, but today we're focused on his inspirational work with MindChamps. David, thank you very much for joining us.
Great. Good to be here, Jack.
Now, David, MindChamps holds the #1 position for early learning education in Singapore. You're also located in Abu Dhabi, Dubai, the Philippines, Vietnam, Myanmar, Australia, and on the horizon is China and Malaysia.
Yes, yeah.
What is it that you guys do that's so different in your approach?
Yes, yeah. Well, in fact, when we first began as a team of researchers, we realized that globally there's a huge gap. And sometimes in society, Jack, we kind of put things upside down. In education, really, what we should be looking at is, from early childhood. Because, sometimes we wait until people become adults, and then we ask the question, why aren't we more creative? Why are we more confident? Why are we more, able to learn and process information in a much more interactive way? We ask these questions, which is all to do with mindset, and it really needs to begin in early childhood. And when we were looking at this space, we realized that, Alvin Toffler, the futurist of, future shocks, he talked about this concept. He said that the illiterate of the 21st century are not those who cannot read and write. In fact, the illiterate of the 21st century are those who cannot unlearn to relearn. And when we examined that, we realized that while people talked about that, we had to go much deeper and look at how do we solve that issue. While people confront us with these challenges in these gaps in society, how do you actually get to the roots of solving it? And we realized that when he's more talked about unlearn to relearn, learning is not about the what to learn. You and I went to school for many years, 5 days a week. We learn a lot of the what to learn. In fact, very rarely were we taught by the system, the craft and the art of learning how to learn. And that is the relationship of the learner to the learning process itself, so we can build a learner for life. So when Toffler was talking about learned, we were looking at just not the what to learn, but the gap, which is the craft of learning how to learn. And then when he touched on that, if you learn, unlearn, relearn, if you think about unlearn, relearn, what's it really about? I mean, to unlearn and relearn, what's that about? That's really about mindset. Because if you don't have the right mindset, there is no unlearning, therefore no relearning. True? It's about mindset. And so at MindChamps, we realized that education should really be about 2 areas to fill in this gap. That is the craft of learning with the mindset of the learner. And to solve this challenge, we really had to get to the roots. It has to start from young. And all the global research has shown that the first 6 years of our, child's development and the way the mind is, formed and shaped and begins to form connections with learning. But the first 6 years is critical. It's everything. In fact, if we get that right, everything else fits. But if we don't get that right, the loving for learning, and then from that perspective, we did the last 20 years of empirical studies. We thought, what kind of mindset do you need? And that is, by the time the child faces the real world in 20 years' time, from, like early childhood to finishing a basic diploma degree, that's about 20 years by the time they face the real world. That's the year 2038. I mean, no one can tell us what the year 2038 will be like. But what we do know is that with artificial intelligence really already outthinking a lot of what we can do today, we need to develop mindset. So gone are the days of content, And just even thinking, while content and thinking is critical, we had to develop what we call this new movement for education. That's what we coined the 3 minds movement. What kind of mindset do they need in 2038? The champion mind, the creative mind, and, as I mentioned, the learning mind. And that's what we call the 3-mind movement of education.
Let's dive into those 3 minds a little bit deeper. Talk to us through those 3 minds that sort of comprise your pedagogy, really.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I mean, the champion mind is due to a research done with, in fact, a very renowned neuroscientist, Professor Alan Snyder. And this was done during the Sydney and the Beijing Olympic event itself. And in fact, we also did it during the Singapore Youth Olympics. And this was a study to study what is it that makes an individual from all walks of life, from politics, arts, business, science, and sport, to go on to achieve their own so-called, the unique, their own strengths to become their own champion. And by champion, we mean not about elitism. We're talking about to be the best you can be in your own field, and be your own best. And so we studied what is it that makes champions who they are. What is that ingredient? What is that mindset that helps the individual to be the best they are? And it's not about the skill set. You see, skill set anybody can learn. Yeah, in fact, AI can learn it even faster than us today. But what we need is the mindset of the learner. Yeah, and it's the mindset that's the transferable commodity, not the skill itself. So the champion mindset was the base of everything that we were doing. With that mindset in place, with that study, we then had to move on to the next area, which was the creative mind. And creative, mindset also, this comes from, Alan's published work about creative mind, where we were looking at, how does the mind actually synthesize concepts, from non-conscious ideation, how do ideas get formed, and therefore, how do we apply multiple perspectives of seeing the world? So therefore, creativity essentially is about nurturing the young mind to be able to see the world through multiple perspectives. And it's only when you can see multiple perspectives that you can then synthesize different concepts to create something new. But if your mind is so set into the way of seeing something, which we all get mindsetted, but if you're not nurtured to see the world through multiple perspectives, it's very challenging to expect the adult to just say, I want you to be creative right now. Sure. In fact, I gave a talk to a group of leaders once, and I said, creativity and innovation, it's not like a tap. You don't just switch it on. Yes, you have to nurture this from young. The third mind, which we touched on, was the learning mind. And that was about how does the brain actually learn itself? What does the neuroscience and psychology say about the learning process in terms of concept formation? How does the brain form concepts? And therefore, how does the brain, non-consciously ideate and make those connections? Because no matter what we learn, in life, whether it's from school, throughout life, it's all about, for our mind, it's about concept formation. It's about the synthesis of structures and narratives that forms concepts that then become, something that we then learn as a concept, therefore we apply.
Do you think we should be introducing more values-based education, particularly for children at a younger age?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I know that STEM has been a bit of a buzz, and, it's been, all of that area has been around for a long time. But really, the focus there needs to be really balanced, values, which is linked to a person's, morals and mindset, and who they are as a human being today is far more critical than ever before. Because when we have a world where, general AI, who can even, outthink and outdo, it's already beating the world's best debaters and chess players, we really need to be nurturing the character of the person, not just the content and, the facts. Yeah.
David, thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Jack.
We are going to take a break. When we return, we will meet more inspiring change makers who are having a big impact on how we view education.
You're watching Entrepreneurs. Welcome back to Entrepreneurs.
Welcome back to Entrepreneurs. We are talking about the future of education with our expert panel. Professor Genevieve Bell, a globally renowned cultural anthropologist turned entrepreneur who is building a startup that will change the shape of university education. And Sarah Moran is back on the panel, founder of the Girl Geek Academy, which is on a mission to get 1 million girls into coding and technology careers. To both of you, a huge welcome, and a welcome back to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Jack.
Now, Genevieve, you have a fascinating background. You spent almost 2 decades as a cultural anthropologist. I guess I've got 2 questions. First one is, what does a cultural anthropologist do? And secondly, what does a cultural anthropologist do in corporate?
Good questions both. So cultural anthropology is the study of people. So what do? We study people and how they make sense of the world. So for me, it's about what do people care about, what frustrates them, what do they want for themselves, their kids, their countries, and then how do you use all of that to build things.
Wow.
Used to be, if you were an academic anthropologist, you use all of that and then write a description of it. For me, the industry piece of it was how do you take all of those insights about what makes people tick and use it to build next generation technologies, services, experiences, products, the whole thing.
And how did that lead you to create the 3A Institute, which I'll just let the viewers know, the 3 A's are autonomy, agency and assurance. What led to that?
Well done, Jack.
I understand people make up A's all the time, right?
That's why I ended up with 3, we call it the 3A, because making people say autonomy, agency and assurance is just too much like hard work.
Cruel.
So, I mean, I spent 20 years in Silicon Valley. I spent those 20 years at Intel, the place that makes microprocessors. You will remember it from do-do-do-do, happy tune. I was their chief futurist for the last 5 years, so my job was to think about what's the world going to look like. And it was really clear to me that we were hitting this kind of critical moment where artificial intelligence was going to go to scale. And for me, it's not just a question of how it goes to scale, it's how does it do it safely and in a way that makes sense for human beings. So when I was recruited to come back to the Australian National University, it was not for a job, it was for a mission. And the mission was, how do you create the framework by which we can bring AI safely to scale? And so the Institute's got 3 imperatives: build a new body of knowledge, find a community of people who care about it as passionately as I do, and find ways to transmit that knowledge that extend beyond just yet another 3-year degree program.
It's so timely for this conversation, isn't it? Yeah. Now, Sarah, you learned to code at the age of 5.
Yes.
Went on to build products and digital products throughout your teens. How did your experience lead to the creation of Girl Geek Academy? And talk to us about the work that you guys do there.
Yeah, so we were a bunch of women who love building tech. I mean, we love building lots of things. We love making 3D printing robots, plus your straightforward tech. And we were going to events where it was all men, and that part, you know, whatever, we were doing it, but terrible food, which is our #1 priority, is, you know, having a good bite to eat. And we realised that the way we design events for women was completely different to how they'd been designed before. And so we ran the world's first all-women hackathon. But we didn't know it was the first. We just thought it was a bunch of us getting together for a cup of tea and some cupcakes, and turn around and actually, well, no one else has done that before. So we said, well, God, if no one else has done that before, what else hasn't been done before to teach people tech and help people engage with the things that are happening around them? And now we teach young girls ages 5 to 8, because I learned to code when I was 5, I know it can be done. And we teach them their first coding experiences as a social get-together and a gathering in school holidays and schools. We teach cyber security through our Cyber Kids program to kids ages 9 to 12. And in high school, we create teams to create tech together and also to build games. We also work with people in industry to make sure that they are absolutely gunning for that job as CTO, because that's what we need, is more women building the internet.
We absolutely do. What changes have you seen in this space over the last few years? I mean, what kind of progress are we seeing, and how do we accelerate it even further?
Particularly in Australia, we're seeing an increase in the number of coding camps that are becoming accessible to young people, but also programs for women and girls. And we need a heck of a lot more of those, because the number of people choosing STEM subjects is definitely declining. And to be quite honest, STEM has a branding problem. You know, when we picture what's it like to work in technology, we picture dude in a hoodie, in the dark, on his own, eating too much pizza.
In the dorm room.
That's exactly, you know, we picture what we imagine Mark Zuckerberg's experience was like at uni, and we think, oh, that's what that would be. Who wants to do that? You know, like, it's just not appealing. And so we are trying to shift that, but I'm not doing it on my own. There's a lot of programs that are coming to the forefront there.
And thank you so much for that, Sarah. Genevieve, one of the interesting sort of distinctions you make is that you liken the shift in education that is occurring at the moment to the shift we saw when the science of business was first added to the university curriculum. Why do you draw that parallel?
So listen, I think one of the things that's always tempting to kind of say is it's always been like this. And the reality is over the last 250 years, new technologies have come along and required cultural, social and educational responses. They basically built new things. So the steam engine made railways. Railways meant we needed engineers. Electricity, well, we required electrical engineers, and also because it created companies in a way that had never existed before, we had business schools. And computers came along and no one knew what to do with them. We had mathematicians and logicians and electrical engineers, but ultimately we needed to create computer scientists. And so for me, when I look at this current moment we're in and I say, what's it going to take to get AI safely to scale, so out of your computer and out of your laptop and into the big bad world, so that, you know, when AI becomes the promise of autonomous vehicles and robots and drones and smart buildings, all of that requires a new way of thinking. And so for me, it's about how do we build the next branch of engineering or the next academic discipline to conquer that world.
Now, Sarah and Genevieve are going to hang around. When we're back from the break, we're going to be debating the future of education. What will education look like in the next 10 to 20 years? Who will lead the change, and how will our next generation of students be affected?
You're watching Entrepreneurs. Welcome back to Entrepreneurs.
Welcome back to Entrepreneurs. We're talking to our expert panel about the future of education, obviously a topic that crosses all borders. Welcoming back for this segment is David Chiem, joining Sarah and Genevieve. Thank you all for joining us for this discussion. Is education keeping pace with the change in the real world?
I think it's pretty clear that the world has just leapt forward and we're still trying to catch up. And it's amazing that we're still setting all these exams and tests from such a young age to kids that are just, really, these exams really mean not very much in the future.
It's very true. And Sarah, you're deep into primary education.
Yeah.
Are we keeping pace there?
No. I have taught teachers in schools to learn coding, but there's a lag time, and the curriculum is full. We've already been teaching all the other things we've been teaching for so many years. To try and then add all of this stuff into it, you've got to think about what is there room for. Yeah. So for us, we've been approaching school holidays. If you work it out, kids have 52 weekends in a year and they've got 12 weeks off school. For us, that's a space for passion to grow. Because if you look at the whole young person and not just the education system, there's a lot more time up your hands.
Yes. Genevieve, you obviously operate at a tertiary level. What's it like there, sort of paralleling the progress in tertiary education versus the progress in the real world?
Yeah, so listen, I've sat in sort of two places, right? So in a university, but I also still hold a job in a large corporate company in the United States. And so for us, when we're looking at employing people out of universities, we have a baseline expectation, precisely to your point, that they should have a set of knowledge skills, but we also have this expectation increasingly that they should have a set of what we now call core skills. So we want people who can collaborate, who can operate in teams of people who aren't just like them, who know how to communicate, but who also know how to think about things like handling ambiguity and risk and of managing uncertainty. And so as I sit inside the university sector now thinking about how do you train people around that, for me it's about how do you move people from problem solving to question framing and asking questions, because it turns out domains of knowledge change over time, but the ability to ask a really good question to work out, is this a thing we should be doing, is this a thing we can do, those are actually the critical, for me, skills that we ought to be teaching. So working out how you thread the needle at university, where it's about how do you transmit knowledge and intellectual rigor, but also train again and build on those sort of core skills that are actually invaluable no matter where you end up.
And I'm going to ask quite a provocative question, but as we know, the nature of work itself is changing. There's exponential technological changes. Do you guys think that change in education, given the size of it, given the bureaucracy of it, given the government involvement, can it change to the degree that it needs to?
I mean, when we were all younger, we all thought, obviously, governments around the world, and I agree with you that this is a global thing, and when we were younger, we all thought, problems and gaps in the society would be solved by governments. And, then we all got a little bit older and we realized that governments around the world are made out of systems, and systems are made out of people, and people have so many mindsets and ways of thinking. And so therefore, for something as large as this to really leap forward, which education, really needs to catch up to, I think that, private and entrepreneurs in private really needs to work in tandem to really drive change.
So what's your view? Can education keep up?
We're working in these systems that are constantly changing, and no system is perfect. Like, that's the first thing you have to understand as an entrepreneur, is to be like, oh, it's not perfect, that's why there's a role for me. That's why we can agitate and move and create new things, and that's the best we can ever ask for, and that's my optimistic hat coming from that space.
Great.
Well, and so for me, because again, I sit in a slightly different sector, right, I actually think there's also ways to think about how do we do more experiments inside the system and create a little bit more space for them. So I've been incredibly lucky where I am at the Australian National University, that I have a vice-chancellor who's willing to tolerate that kind of thing. So we took the best of what I learned how to do in Silicon Valley, which is rapid prototyping, aggressive iteration, move fast and see what happens. And it was 12 weeks between the time I said to the Vice-Chancellor, I think we should offer a master's level course in next generation thinking around AI. So how do we take AI to scale? How do we think about ethics in human beings? No course was being offered anywhere on the planet. And I said, let's get on with it. And they went, you can't do it. I'm like, oh, I don't believe that. And it took us 12 weeks from the day I said to the Vice-Chancellor, I want one, to closing out our first application period and having 4 times as many applicants as I thought I would get for slots. And so and we'll start teaching in February, and we'll be 2 years ahead of the curve. And so the argument for me there is, sure, the machinery moves slowly, but there's always room inside the machinery to aggressively experiment if you have brave bosses and people who are willing to try a little bit of things that are different. And so for us, bringing the best of kind of entrepreneurial culture, Silicon Valley culture, and putting it inside a university is a way to try and do something a little bit differently.
Now, let's talk about technology, but in the development and the delivery of the education itself. Where is it helping? Where is it hindering?
So listen, I think, one of the things that's really interesting for me, having come back into the university sector, having been gone for a really long time, is that we're talking about students that are very different in terms of their expectations about access to knowledge, about how they learn. But I also think there's pieces where we need to be thinking really carefully about what the right balance is of technical systems, human systems, engaging with people, and about how you bring the best of technology but keep the best of why you'd be in a university in the first place. So, why would you want to be in a place where education is being transmitted? It's not just about the lecture as the only mechanism by which information is distributed, but you also need to continue to make sort of the hard work possible of how you learn to be critical about your sources, how you learn to know how to ask, is this a fact or an opinion? How you learn to ask, what are the things that are immutable versus all the things that can move? And that stuff requires discipline and time. And so there's always this interesting balance between how do you use next generation technology to make classrooms come to life, to make ideas sing, and to give students voices in all those processes, as well as the notion that actually acquiring an education and acquiring a mindset takes work. It's not simple.
And I'm totally with you there, Genevieve. In fact, what you're really touching on is, how do we engage the students? Because, we're living in a world where obviously the minds of today are so different to when we were at school. This is the first time in the human race where a child's optics can focus on something about the size of our palm and literally focus there for hours, and their thumbs are better than ever before in the history of mankind. And so how do we engage the mind today has to change. And one of the things we've got to look at, in fact, as we discuss this, is about how do we engage and train and retrain the teachers to be able to engage the students.
And also, how do we not lock up education and think that it's just for kids and young people, right? So we're also facing a critical moment in time where a whole lot of us across multiple generations are going to have to re-engage, differently skill ourselves. And so for me, part of it's also about how do we make universities and the knowledge inside universities accessible to everyone. So how do we not think that you have to be willing to sign up to 3 years of your life or 2 years of your life? How do we make it possible that, in my very naive mode, universities are a bit like seed libraries. How do we make sure we get the seeds out of the seed library and not just hold them there? So how do you allow that people can come for a day, for a week, for one idea, and have that experience and then take it forward and do something else with it. So there's a bit about, you know, the best of how do you not hold all the knowledge in one place and make people sign up their whole lives to be there and not assume that they're all going to be 18 when they get there. Some of them are going to be 70.
Let's hope so. Yes. Thank you all so much for coming on this panel. Genevieve, Sarah and David, thank you very much for coming and having such a meaningful conversation around a topic that affects all future nations in terms of how we're currently raising generations. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you to our supporting partner, Startup Oz. And for your viewers at home, don't forget you can watch us on any time on Foxtel Go and in the catch-up section of our website, yourmoney.com.au. Thank you for your company and tuning in for tonight's conversation. I'm Jack Delosa, and good night.